My bike's on 163 hours now. Today I'm going to be inspecting the clutch, which is located behind this cover. I haven't had any problems with it. It's not slipping or anything, but one thing that's good to replace are the inner hub dampers, which are these parts. These are new ones. They're made of rubber, and over time they can harden up and you get a little bit of play in the clutch. So I'm going to be showing how to change those. I'm also going to inspect the clutch plates, and I've got a new clutch kit here, so if the plates are right on the minimum limit, I'll put the new clutch in. And then I've got a few other spare pieces, a lock washer for the inner hub and a gasket for the cover. And I've printed out the relevant pages from the service manual, and it details all the clutch components. And one thing that you need to be aware of is the clutch plates. It uses different thicknesses, so that when you're assembling it, you want to make sure the plates are in the right place and also the right orientation. So I'll show how to do that as well. To inspect the clutch, you need to take the clutch cover off, and there's oil behind here. So you either need to drain the oil or lean your bike over to the left on its side. My oil needs changing, so I'm going to do that first anyway. Also, I think if I end up putting in a new clutch, it's a good idea to have fresh oil in there. And to change the oil, I'm going to be using the Tokyo Off-Road oil drain tool, which allows me to leave the skid plate on. So I've just leant the bike over and then undo the oil drain. And then fit the oil drain tool. It has an O-ring in, so make sure the O-ring is fitted, and then just screw it in. And it just needs to be hand tight. And I've already warmed up the engine, and I've also removed the oil filler bolt. That allows the oil to drain faster. The oil drain bolt has a magnetic center part, and it collects any debris, so be sure to clean it off before replacing it. As you can see here, all the debris is very fine. If there are any large parts stuck to the magnet, that would be a concern. Then you can remove the oil drain tool. And refit the oil drain bolt with a new copper washer. And the oil drain bolt needs to be torqued to 20 Newton meters. The first step is to remove the clutch cover, and it's held on with these bolts. They're all different lengths, so one tip I have is before you remove them, get a scrap of cardboard, make a simple drawing, and then using a screwdriver poke some holes in where the bolts go. Then when you remove the bolts, you can put them into the cardboard, and you know exactly where each bolt goes. Doing this, you can save a lot of time and frustration when you reassemble. Also, the rear brake has a spring connected to the clutch cover. I leave the spring attached to the cover and remove it after I've taken the cover off. It's a lot easier that way. You see how different the bolts are. Okay, so I've removed all the bolts now, and there's 3 different length bolts, 4 short ones, a long one, and then 2 even longer ones. It could be very easy to get these 2 mixed up, so doing something like this I think is a very good idea. Then you can lift off the clutch cover, and this has an O-ring, so you want to be careful of where that goes. And you can see the spring comes off very easily. and the O-ring has stayed in place nicely, so I'm just going to leave that there for now. With the clutch cover off, you can see the Belleville spring, which puts pressure on the clutch plates, and the amount of pressure can be adjusted using this ring. There's actually 3 different positions, and you might be able to see a marking here. This is position 1, the position that's being used now is 2, and this is 3. So make a note of which position your clutch is set to, and when you put it back together, use the same setting. Then you can go ahead and loosen these 6 bolts, and it's a good idea to loosen them in a crisscross pattern. And the Belleville spring is a conical shape. You can probably see there it's not flat, it's cone shaped, and the plate pushes it in and makes it flat, applies pressure to the clutch plates. Then there's a washer here, and it has a marking which says top, and that indicates it should be on the outer side. So when you replace it, make sure the orientation is correct. Okay, then carefully lift off the plate. You can see it's got one steel plate stuck to it, so I'm going to remove that and put it back in place. And you can remove the dowel pins as well. You want to be really careful you don't drop these down in the engine. I'm now ready to remove the clutch pack, and when I'm taking the plates off, I like to keep them in the same order and also the orientation, so I've got a reference point in case I'm not sure of something and I can check afterwards. And the case is shaped so you can get your fingers down each side, and so put them down as far as they go and try and pull off as many plates at the same time. And then for the final plate, I think it's just one steel plate, you can use a couple of pick tools and get it off. Then you can remove the clutch throwout. I'm going to just take that off and leave the shaft in there. The inner hub is free to rotate, so in order to remove the nut, you need to hold the hub in some way. There are a couple of different holders you can use. This is one style which you can purchase easily, and it's adjustable so it'll fit a wide range of hubs. Another way of doing it, if you want a specific tool for your bike and is maybe a little safer, less likely to damage anything, is this style. I made this myself out of some old clutch plates. I used 3 clutch plates welded and then made a handle, and then you put it on, insert the dowels, and it holds it very nicely. So removing, the method I prefer is to use an air impact, and with the impact there's very little force on the hub itself, so I'm just going to use this tool just to make sure it doesn't spin around while I'm removing it. So you can just install it like that, get your air impact, and it should come off very yeah. Then once you have the nut off, you can take the lock washer off and then pull the hub off, and make sure you don't lose anything. So yeah, there's a spacer here which I'm going to put back on here so I don't lose it, and then I'm going to take this apart on the bench. While you have the clutch plates out, you should also inspect the clutch basket, particularly these edges where the clutch plates engage on the basket. If you can feel any ridges, that would indicate that the clutch basket needs replacing. Mine feels nice and smooth on the edges, so I can't feel any ridges at all. so no problem. But if your bike's got a lot of hours and you can start feeling ridges there, it's probably a good idea to replace it. Okay, so I've got the inner basket on the bench for inspection, and you can see here these parts, they shouldn't have any play at all. So that indicates that the dampers need replacing, which is what I guessed anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and replace those. So to disassemble the inner hub, you simply push the parts. There's two pieces, they just come apart like that, and you can see all the rubber dampers falling out. So 6 of these. So make sure you keep those separate from the new ones, don't get them mixed up. And then the new dampers you just push on. And the way they're shaped, they only go on in one way, so you can't really mess it up. Right, so that's all 6 dampers mounted, and then you just push the 2 halves together. And it'll be a lot more difficult to push the halves together with the new dampers in. And then checking for play, there's absolutely no play at all. It's rock solid, so a huge difference from before. So it's definitely worth replacing the dampers at least once a year, I think. And then to check it's assembled correctly, these 2 surfaces should be level with each other. If the inner part is lower, it means it needs to be pushed on further. But you can see there it's level, so it's assembled correctly. One thing I like to do before reinstalling the inner hub is to clean off the shaft threads. Loctite is used, so if you don't clean it all off, it's difficult to install a nut at the correct torque. So it's a bit tedious, but if you use a pick tool, you can clean off the Loctite fairly easily. Just scrape it off. And then when you finish that, make sure you clean all of the debris out. So I've used this cloth so debris doesn't get down inside. Then when you've cleaned off the threads, you can do a test fit. And it should go on nice and smoothly. If it's still very stiff, it indicates there's still some Loctite on there. So you need to clean it off a bit more. Now you're ready to install the inner hub, and make sure this spacer is installed correctly. Like I mentioned when I took the inner hub off, it's very easy to stick to this surface, and then it could drop off somewhere. So make sure you've got it on there, and then slide the inner hub on. And then I always use a new lock washer. And then for the nut install, you need to apply some Loctite, so I'm going to do that. So the recommended Loctite for the nut is Loctite 648, which is a high strength Loctite, and I already had some, so I'm going to go ahead and use this. So the nut needs to be torqued to 100 Newton meters, and I'm going to be holding it in place with the tool I made myself out of clutch plates. So to do that, you need to install the dowels. So make sure the dowels are pressed all the way down. Okay, so I've installed all 6 dowels, and the big reason I prefer using this type of tool is it supports the basket in 6 places. If you use the other tool I showed, like this one, it's only 2 places, and it's a lot more likely to cause damage to the basket. So if you've got a tool like this, it's much better. And then torque the nut to 100 Newton meters. And then you want to carefully remove the dowels. being sure not to lose any. To bend up the lock washer tabs, I like to use a screwdriver to get them bent up a little way initially, and then some Nip-X to finish it off. Then you can install the throwout. Make sure it's pressed in correctly. You can pull out the rod, make sure it's seated fully, and then push it down. The service manual contains some information about checking the clutch plates. For the fiber plates, you want to check the thickness is greater than 1.9 millimeters. And for the metal plates, you want to check there's no discoloration or scoring. So I'm going to inspect the clutch plates now. So this is the outermost metal plate, and that looks in good condition, and there's no heavy scoring. And then I'm going to be measuring the fiber plates using some calipers. So the spec is greater than 1.9 millimeters, and this one is 1.94, so that's okay. And then the next metal plate, there's a little bit of discoloration. You'll find probably as you get close to the middle of the clutch pack, it gets hotter, so I'm expecting more discoloration. It's not too bad though. And the next fiber plate I'm going to measure, and that's 1.95 as well, so that's within spec. Yeah, 1.95. And yeah, as I expected, it's starting to get discolored even in the middle part, showing signs of some heat. So let's measure this one as well. So that's 1.94, 1.95. So the fiber plates are still within spec, but my main concern is the condition of the metal plates. As you can see here, there's some discoloration. And yeah, it's quite heavy discoloration there. So, as I already have a new complete kit, I'm going to replace the clutch. If I wanted to do it as cheaply as possible, I'd possibly just replace the metal plates. But the clutch kit is much cheaper buying the kit than buying individual parts. So possibly the price of the metal plates is close to the entire kit. So I'm just going to use the clutch kit I have and put that in. The clutch kit comes with a full set of steel and fiber plates, and also a new Belleville spring and a washer. One key thing to do with the fiber plates is soak them in oil before installing, so I'm going to do that now. So I put the clutch plates in a Ziploc bag and added some transmission oil, and I'm going to leave these to soak. If you know you've got to change the clutch, it's a good idea to do this overnight. When installing the metal plates, there's a few things to be careful of. The innermost plate is marked with an S, and that goes towards the engine. And then the other plates are different thicknesses, so you need to be aware of that. Also, the plates are stamped from steel, so there's a rounded edge and a sharp edge, and you should have the sharp edge pointing out. So I orientate all of the plates, other than the inner one, which doesn't really matter, with this sharp edge out. And then I've measured the thickness of each plate, and interestingly I found there's 3 different thicknesses. So the inner and outer plates are 1 millimeter, and then there's 2 1.3 millimeter plates on the inside, and then the remainder are 1.4 millimeters. So to illustrate that a little more clearly, I printed out the parts list diagram and modified it. So there's a total of 9 metal plates, and in the parts list it says the outer ones are 1mm, and then the inner 7 plates are 1.4 millimeters. And what I found was fitted to my bike and also in the kit is after the innermost 1mm plate, there's 2 1.3mm plates, and then 5 1.4mm, and then on the outside there's a 1mm plate. So that's something to be aware of, and is different from both the service manual and the parts list. Okay, so I've had my fiber plates soaking oil for quite some time now, so I'm ready to install them. And first thing to do is put the dowels in. So 6 of these. Make sure you don't drop them down anywhere. And then the first plate is a metal plate, and it's the one marked with the S. So that goes in with the S pointing towards the engine, and slide it over the dowels. And then a fiber plate. All the fiber plates are the same thickness, so it doesn't matter about the order or orientation. And then you want one of the 1.3mm plates, and you want the sharp edge pointing out. And I've also put some oil on the plates as well. And then you just alternate between metal plate and fiber plate. So next is another 1.31, and then a fiber plate, and then you start the 1.4mm plates. And then the last metal plate is a 1mm plate. Okay, now you're ready to install the pressure plate. I've put some oil on the inner surface of the pressure plate as well. And then there's a washer that goes on, which when I took it off I noted there's a top marking on that, so make sure that goes on the right orientation. And then the Belleville spring goes on top of that. And then the tensioner for the Belleville spring. And this has 3 positions, so I noted that I was using position 2. If you use position 1, it applies less pressure to the spring, and 3 is the strongest pressure. I'm just going to use the same setting that it came off on, so number 2. And then I'm going to put a couple of bolts in to hold it in place. And these need to be torqued. And I'm going to use a crisscross pattern. So I'm just going to put all bolts in finger tight just to hold the spring in place. Okay, so all the bolts are finger tight now, and I'm going to start tensioning them. And they need to be torqued to 6 Newton meters, but I'm going to do it in steps. So I'm going to do each bolt half a turn in a crisscross pattern. And I'll need to do this multiple times, but doing it this way ensures that you don't over torque it. And just work round. Okay, so now I'm ready to start using a torque wrench, and I've set it to 6 Newton meters. I'll just go back and check everything's okay. Okay, so that's all torqued. So the way to check whether you're using the right adjuster is to check the flatness across the spring. When it's correctly adjusted, it should be flat and not concave or convex. So you can use a steel rule, put it across the spring, and there should be no gaps, which in this case it looks as though it's adjusted correctly. If it was sticking up, you'd need to apply more tension. If it's going down, then less tension. And the service manual details the actual spec for the flatness, and it should be between 0 and 0.1 millimeter. So you can use a feeler gauge to, if you can see a gap, you can use a feeler gauge and actually measure how much the gap is. So if it's outside of those limits, you should try the next setting. Now we've completed the install of the new clutch, and we're ready to put the clutch cover back on. But before you do that, make sure you wipe any dirt or debris away from the faces of the case to ensure a good seal. And it's a good idea to use a new O-ring on the clutch cover. Okay, and then the rear brake spring, I always put it onto the case and then install it like this. I find that a lot easier than trying to put the spring on afterwards. And then you can start installing the bolts. And as I mentioned when I took the cover off, you want to make sure you get the bolts in the right places, because they're all different lengths. So I install the one by the spring first, because it's under tension, so you want it to hold in place. So just do it loosely, and then you can start installing the other bolts. Okay, next you want to torque all the bolts to 10 Newton meters. And then go around all of them just to check they're torqued correctly. Then the last step is to put in 800 millimeters of gearbox oil. So before you ride the bike, you obviously want to check the clutch operation is correct. So start the bike up in neutral, pull clutch in, put into gear, and you want to confirm that it doesn't jump excessively or it doesn't drag, and then slowly release the clutch and make sure it engages correctly. So that feels fine, so I don't think there's any problem there. So with the clutch plates and damper rubbers changed, I should be ready for another 160 hours of riding.